Hey, how's it going, everybody? I just realized I don't think I ever mentioned how we moved here and how we moved our stuff here. And one of the things that gave us a lot of trouble when we were planning moving is figuring out how to get our stuff down here. After doing a ton of research, I actually found a way of getting our stuff down here in not a cheap way, but a much more economical way. It seemed to be something that a lot of people did not know about. Okay, so let's get it out of the way. Figuring out whether you want to take your items or sell them off and start a brand new life from scratch is one of the first things that you pretty much have to decide for yourself. In our case, we decided that we had too many sentimental items, and excuse the noise, but that's what it is. That is Mexico's, that is life. So for us, there was way too much that was sentimental, way too many irreplaceable things that we really wanted to keep with us, that we just, after a lot of thought, we just could not imagine no longer having in our lives. We wanted the things that meant a lot to us and we've collected throughout the years to come along with us. So it was very important to us to figure out how to make sure that everything made it safely down here to Mexico. If you have gone down that rabbit hole or you're just starting out, you're very quickly realizing that there really aren't that many options. Now, there's a lot of companies and there's a lot of different people that you can connect with. A lot of them are fantastic, but for the most part, as far as methods that you can actually use to ship your items, not many methods. One option is mailing it. There's a lot of people that also mail their items like in boxes, things like that. If you don't have that much, this might be an economical option for you. Unfortunately for us, that was nowhere near close for what we needed, but it is an option. The other option is driving it. You can drive it yourself across the border. This, again, was not an option for us. In addition to so many things that we were bringing with us, we also were bringing our 2 cats. The next option was sending it by truck. That was definitely an option that we considered, and it was definitely a viable choice. Now, there are a lot of different companies out there that say that they can ship your item from the US or Canada down all the way to Mexico, and most of them can. However, you have to be extremely careful as to how they are transporting it. Not every shipping truck company works the same way, especially when it comes to crossing borders. So we'll get into that in just a second as well. The next option was sending it by sea. Basically filling up a shipping container, having it sent down, it comes through a port, and then it gets driven in Mexico to wherever the destination is. So this was actually one of the most feasible options that we saw for ourselves, especially because we were really trying to make sure that our items made it safe. And then the last thing was the one that we decided to take, which was kind of a surprise to us because anytime we watched a video, any research we did, anytime that you came across is U-Haul an option, the answer was a automatic no. And that is correct technically, but not completely. Basically, the rule is that you cannot drive a U-Haul truck across the border into Mexico. So that is definitely off the table. That is not an option. So even if you're driving yourself, you cannot drive it into Mexico and then drive it back to drop it off. Not happening. So therein lies the problem, that as soon as you see that full stop, not allowed, most people tend not to dig deeper because you automatically assume that U-Haul trucks are one rule to rule them all. And the further we dug, we realized that there's U-boxes. When we started digging into U-Haul, and as you can see by here on the screen, you'll be able to see that on their website they have a U-box section and there's an international shipping section. And we called them and got some more information, and yes, they do ship to Mexico. So that definitely piqued our interest, and we decided to check them out and see how they compared. So now let's compare the 3 options that we were really considering. We were considering sending it by truck, sending it by sea, and sending it with U-Box. Now, there are some really big differences here. By truck, basically, you have different options as far as sizes. Professional trucking companies will have much larger trucks. You can go with a smaller company and they might have smaller moving trucks that they might do it with. So I can't really give you a full out price on what the range of all of it is, because it really is a massive range. However, how they do it drastically changes. I would suggest that if you have things that are very important to you and you 100% want to make sure that they are safe and that they make it down to you, don't go with the smaller companies. It might be the cheapest route, which you'll definitely see. However, there is no guarantee that those items will make it down. And when it comes to customs and the borders and the actual path, once it crosses the border, there's so many things that can go wrong. A lot of the smaller companies, they even ask for extra cash to not necessarily to pay them off, but to carry along the trip in case they need to pay people off to make sure that they get through. And even that doesn't guarantee that. Now, one of the biggest things that we saw, even with the bigger companies, is that it depended what kind of trucks they sent. So, for example, there were some companies that we talked to that there was a truck that picked up all your items from your place of origin and it took it all the way to the border. Now, at the border, it went through customs, but it then had to transfer to a different truck, because that truck is the one that's able to travel within Mexico. So they might have arranged both trucks, but still there is a period of time when all your items are being taken off the truck and put onto a different truck. Now, everything might be fine, but at the same time, it's just one extra step where things could disappear, could get damaged. Now, there were some trucking companies that did have the necessary permits to basically drive the truck all the way from your place of origin through the border all the way to the destination. So in those situations, that is much safer. And then there were even some others that it went from their origin to their own kind of business port, in like Texas, for example, got transferred over to the main truck that was going to cross the border, and that one across the border all the way to the destination. So at least it stayed within the same company's operations. So there was still a transfer, but it was still safer. Now, the difference between that and by sea is that by sea, there was only one size, a normal shipping container. So you cannot get any smaller, you cannot get any bigger. You can get multiple if you really need that much, but it is one size. So for the shipping containers, it was basically a 20 cubic meter container. And like I said, there was no other options. I'm sorry if I'm looking down, reading off of notes, it's a lot to remember. Now, with the shipping container, the one nice thing is that once you filled it, that got locked up, that went to a shipping port, got shipped by sea, arrived in the port in Mexico, and then was transferred over to a truck that carried it to your destination. Meanwhile, that container never got opened or transferred. Now, if customs opens it just to inspect it, that's one thing, but there's no transferring of your items from one container to another. So that same shipping container that you packed is going to be unpacked at your place of destination. Now, that can be a little tricky depending on where you're coming from. If you're coming from a suburbs where they can come and drop off a shipping container for you to fill, great. Very convenient, actually. However, if you live in a big city, which we did since we came from New York City, and if you have been there before, there is very little parking and there is almost zero way that you're going to be able to park a shipping container while you try and load the thing. Now, the problem is also, being in a big city, you can't have them just drop off the container overnight so they can pick it up a different day. Why? Because now you're talking about filling a container, putting a basic master lock on it, and you have to watch it the entire time. Not going to happen. So you basically have to take a chance that no one's going to break your lock and get into the things overnight. So that was not an option as well. We would have to have had taken all of our items to the port where we would fill the container and then ship it over. And then there is the U-Box. So when it comes to the U-Box, there's a couple things. They can either bring the U-Box to your location where you want to fill it up, which again, if you live in the suburbs, you're in a house or you have a large parking lot or whatever, very convenient, because they could drop it off, you can fill it up, take your time, and they can pick it up on a specific day and begin the shipping process. But like us, we were in a city, we couldn't have it dropped off overnight. So we could actually fill it up at a U-Haul storage location, which is where they were keeping the U-Boxes. What that did is that it gave us the option to either fill it up in one day, or we could take multiple trips and fill it up over the course of a couple weeks, until it was completely done. Now, U-Boxes come in one size, so you can send multiple, you can send one, just depending on how much you're sending, which actually made it very convenient because it wasn't large trucks, it was smaller U-boxes. So you can kind of adapt based on what you want, and it allowed us to have a much smaller budget, and that is where the big difference lied. So just for example, for our situation, we were coming from New York City going to Mexico City. So for us, the total estimate that came out for the truck method was somewhere between $14,000 and $17,000. Huge. Obviously, for some people that might be worth it, especially if you really have a ton of stuff. And again, so many that number can range so much just depending on so many factors. But for us in our specific situation, it was about $14,000 to $17,000 after all is said and done. What if I load the truck myself? Well, that's where it gets a little tricky. When it comes to that, the insurance, when it comes to these trucking companies, are very specific. So if you want to make sure that everything in that truck is fully insured and covered, you need to let them load it, transport it, and unload it. Because if anything happens, it happened during their while they were in charge. If you do the loading, you are basically eliminating yourself from being able to get coverage for breakage. Why? Because you could have broken it because of the method and the way that you loaded it and packed it in. And so now your coverage only covers basically if something gets lost or stolen, or something really happens dramatically to that truck or something like that. But as far as breakage, not so much. Same thing with unloading. So you really are left with little. If you want full coverage of insurance, you really are left with little option besides letting them handle it from beginning to end. And that's where it added up to about $14,000 to $17,000. Now by sea, it was a little bit different. It's not that much of savings, but it was a little bit. Our estimate was $13,000 through $16,000, and that was mainly based on whether they were packing it up or we were packing it up and unloading and loading. So that's kind of where that variation came in. But that was the lowest amount that we could have done as far as a large shipment. So now comparing the two, 14 to 17, 13 through 16, it's maybe a $1,000 to $4,000 difference, but that's still a decent amount of money. And again, even at the low end, $13,000 is not chump change. It's a lot of money to invest in a move that hopefully you've done your research and you're going for the right reasons, because that's a lot of money to invest in to go on a whim. So again, you really have to think about the fact that, is it a better option for you to take your things with you, or to take some things with you, or to just sell everything, take some luggage with some of your clothes, and then kind of start fresh here in Mexico. And that'll also depend if you, once you get here, you're gonna look for a furnished apartment or an unfurnished apartment, and that's a whole different video. But all those factors come into play when you're deciding this. So now let's talk about the option that we picked. Again, we didn't know about U-Box beforehand until we really started digging deep, and we almost stopped looking because everybody kept saying, no U-Haul, you can't do U-Haul, U-Haul's not allowed to go through Mexico, blah, blah, blah. But after talking to them and figuring it out, keep in mind, a U-Box is 257 cubic feet, 7.3 cubic meters. As you can see on this diagram, this is kind of like the dimensions of it, and it can hold the maximum capacity of 2,000 pounds, or 907 kilos. Each box is approximately, I'd say, 1.5 to 2 rooms, depending on how much stuff you have in them, but kind of consider it around that. So each box costs around $4,200. Massive difference compared to what we were looking at. Now, was $4,200 enough for all the things that we wanted to? No. We had about 2 boxes worth. However, what the boxes also did allow us to do, because there was so much invested in this move, it allowed us to potentially ship our most necessary items in our first box, and then have a second box a couple months down the road to kind of split up the costs. Because if you're already looking into the costs and everything involved in moving, it adds up very quickly. Now, you can send one box, you can send multiple boxes at the same time. That's up to you. Now, if we would have sent multiple boxes, if we would have sent both boxes at the same time, it would have actually decreased the amount per box, because I think the quote for both boxes was like $6,500. So it literally dropped the price of per box by about $800 to $1,000, which is significant. And that's mainly because it does not increase what they have to do. You just fill up 2 boxes, they are picking up just 1 extra box, it's shipping together, and they're dropping it off together. So the costs are almost the same. You're just paying for an extra space. So it is, if you are planning on bringing a lot, this might actually work out in your favor up until you get to that third box. Past the third box, I think the shipping container or truck would probably be your best bet. For us, we had quite a bit of items, but I will tell you right now, a lot fits in a box. If you are literally like a champion of Tetris and you are one of those people that can pack, meticulously, you can fit a lot into these U boxes. Now, keep in mind that there's a limit of 2,000 pounds, but that is still a lot. Just as a quick example, we easily were able to fit a king size bed right side up flat against the wall, and it was still some room to get to the edge. Hopefully that helps you visualize. It's a big box. Once you get into the process with U-Box, they do send you multiple forms. First of all, they do send you a customs information form, which kind of gives you a rundown of everything that you need to know as far as customs, what you can pack, how you need to pack it, just basically a rundown of everything that this is going to entail. There's a couple forms that they'll have you fill out. For example, this one is the reservation form. You'll just have to basically let them know how many boxes you're planning on using, your destination address, and then also there's 3 options given to you as far as dates. So if you're in an area where there's a lot of U-Boxes available, this won't be an issue. You'll get your priority date. But let's say you're in an area where there's either a lack of supply or there's high demand, you might have to go for option 2 or 3. Even though New York City is a really big city, I had no problems getting it on my first option. So just FYI. That sheet will also have you pick whether you want to take your items to a Uhaul center, so basically a storage location that will keep the box there for you to be able to fill it up, or if you want a box to be delivered to you. So basically they'll drop it off, you can take your time filling it up. You'll schedule a pickup date, so they'll come and pick up the boxes and begin the process. And that'll also affect the price, which is not a lot. The next form is the customer contact form. On this form, they'll basically have you put all your passport information, your contact information, your destination. So you will need an exact address, and also the travel dates that you're going to be traveling to Mexico. This situation is mainly because they have to kind of match this information that you're giving. Okay. This is because they have to match this information to the information on your temporary residency as far as your date of travel into the country matches up. Which, as you will know by a lot of other paperwork that you're going to be doing probably for temporary residency, things have to match up here. Things are very difficult if you put different information in different places. It's just going to go all wrong. They cannot begin the actual shipping process until you have a destination address, because they're going to need all that before they can start it, because they need all the information for customs and just all the permits that they have to do on their end. This next form is the packed by customer release form. Basically, it's a release form just with a detailed list of what you are not allowed to pack. So you're basically saying that you've read through this, you are 100% agreeing to it, and you 100% confirm that you are not packing any of this. Please make sure you follow these instructions, because if there's anything that hints at these items being in there, your box will be opened at customs, and it will just delay it because it will be stuck in customs for a while, and you just don't want any of that. So make sure you read this list carefully. Make sure there's nothing in there that you should not be in. One of the biggest things that I think people forget is that with almost any of these methods of shipping, if you are shipping it as your household goods with your temporary or permanent residency, you cannot have new items in there. So don't go out and just start shopping for a ton of stuff and fill it up with new items. That being said, if you remove some of those items from their boxes and pack them all together or whatever, it'll probably be fine. However, it could still be a little iffy. But 100% do not go buy a new TV and just put that box in there, because you know that it is protected by the styrofoam and everything, because they will catch it and it will cause a lot of issues. It'll be either be taken out, or you're going to be taxed for almost everything in there because you're breaking the rules of what is allowed. Basically, the rule is that you're supposed to only have household goods that you have used for 6 months or more, in order to not basically bring a whole bunch of new items for commercial use or anything like that. So just make sure you're looking at that list again, what's allowed and what's not allowed, because it's very important, because you just do not want anything to trigger anything at customs. As you can see, there's many areas in all these forms where there is information about what you cannot pack. I cannot stress it enough. Pay attention. The next form is the insurance form. Now, as I mentioned with the trucks, the insurance is all dependent on how much you have, obviously, just like anything else, but also whether you're packing it, you're loading it, you're unloading it. All those factors come into play. So the less you actually do, the more chances that your items are covered. Now, in this situation, even the insurance was slightly less with U-Box. So basically, they have coverage from $1,000, $5,000, $10,000, and $20,000 per box. So you have to decide yourself based on what you're putting in there, which category that falls in, because if you have $20,000 worth of stuff in there and you only claim $10,000 in insurance and something happens to that box, you are not getting $20,000 because of your inventory. It is actually somewhere between $50 and $150 depending on the level of insurance you get per box. So again, the insurance is per box. So if you claim $20,000 in each box, that'll be $300 because you're paying two $150 insurance policies basically. Or you can waive it. However, I suggest you do cover it, because if you are putting this much time in and this much money into taking things from wherever you're departing from into Mexico, you want to make sure that it arrives, or at the very least you're compensated for all of it in case something happens. Because if you're starting from scratch here, again, the money adds up very quickly. And I think that's something a lot of people tend to miscalculate and underestimate, because they only think about the large items that they need to buy. For example, if you're going into an unfurnished place, you're probably going to have to buy all new appliances, because they usually do not come with appliances. For example, a new fridge, a washer, a dryer, dishwasher, just depending on how your apartment is set up. But if it's unfurnished and you're doing it that way, you're going to have to buy all that. Now, if you're going into a fully furnished place, then you have nothing to buy except for maybe decor or your personal items. But if you're going into a long-term unfurnished place, for example, it's a lot and it adds up very quickly. So just make sure you cover it if you can. Like I said, it's even that, let's say you have $10,000 worth in there, I think it's about $100. $100 is not a lot considering you're already spending $4,000 on the shipment. So my suggestion, just get it covered. Once you have all those forms filled out, the entire process begins. You will get notified, or I would suggest you just stay on top of it, contact them, just, keep getting updates. But once they get the go ahead when it comes to the permits and everything like that, because one of the benefits of going with U-Haul and U-Box, which I hadn't talked about before, is that they have their own team that deals with customs. They have their own entire team. They have their own lawyers that deals with all the permits and everything like that. So you don't have to do those individually. So that's why it's very important that the forms they do have you fill out, that you fill them out correctly, and that your dates and amounts and inventory and everything else. And the last sheet that you actually have to fill out, which is the most important sheet, is your inventory. This is the sheet that you're going to have to really pay attention to, because it has to be filled out a very specific way. If you have any questions about it, I would suggest asking them before you even start it, because it's crucial that this is done correctly, because one, it'll keep customs off the more detailed you are. Now, you don't have to put every single item, but the way that it has to be done is very specific. Now, for the larger electronic items, for example, as you can see, there is a spot for serial numbers. All your monitors, TVs, or anything like that, you have to put the serial numbers on them, the model, the make, and all that. Reasoning why? Because technically, if customs does track, they can track those serial numbers to see how old that item is. Again, in that information sheet, 100% read it multiple times on how you are supposed to pack it. And if there's any inkling of a question, just reach out to them and ask. They'll be happy to help you out. Now, once the process begins of it shipping, once they've gotten all the permits, it goes from your place of origin and it goes all the way to the border. It goes through customs, and then it gets picked up and goes to your destination. The customs part is the part that could sway it. They usually, I think, estimate about 4 weeks. I think that's pretty much the average that everybody gets as an estimate of how long it should take. Ours actually took about 3 weeks, and that's because it literally only spent like a day in customs. It went right through. So, and I've heard some things about people where maybe some things weren't in order, some things didn't match, or there was just something iffy about the box, and it might have been stuck for a week. So that's where kind of that 4 weeks come into play. But after it goes through customs, it basically takes a couple days for it to arrive to you at your destination. Now, when it comes to your destination, depending on what options you have picked when you set it up, if you picked for them to unload it for you, they will basically unload everything one by one from the truck. You will basically watch as they unload everything, and with the person that's in charge, you will check off each box that they are bringing into your place to make sure that everything that you have listed on your inventory sheet is actually dropped off. Now, if there's something missing or there's something damaged, please keep an eye out for that. And in case there is anything that is damaged or missing, you'll end up filling out a form at the end when it's all said and done, before they leave, and they will submit that for you to be able to go through their process of insurance claims. We didn't have that issue. I cannot rave enough about how amazing the delivery guys were. They were extremely thorough. They were very careful with everything. They were very detailed, and everything made it 100% safe, intact, and everything that we put in the box was 100% here. So we can't rave enough about it. Obviously, everybody's situation will be different. Everybody's experience will be different. Locations will be different. But if you are considering at all shipping your items or bringing some items to Mexico, and you are really having a hard time with the prices because you don't quite have a ton of stuff, you don't have like a full house worth of things or a full apartment, you're actually letting go of some things and just bringing what's important to you, the U-Box is probably one of the best options out there as far as it being safe, it being fast, it being efficient. Now, I have talked about everything that's positive. There is one thing that I can say that maybe was a negative, and that is you are basically communicating with a main line connection with U-Haul. So this happened to us twice, where the person that was in charge of our specific account was changed. So I kind of had to explain some things multiple times. But that was towards the beginning. Once the shipping process began, everything was 100% okay. But just keep that in mind, that that's one thing that could happen, that you might have your account person be switched up. And if that's the case, it just kind of puts a little wrench in the works, but it doesn't derail anything. So I wouldn't say it's necessarily a negative, but just something to be aware of. So yeah, so there you go. So hopefully this helps. I know for us, we had an extremely hard time finding any information on this and could almost find no videos about it. So hopefully me putting this out there can help a lot of you that are thinking about making this trip. And if you are, good luck. We absolutely love our lives here. We love the people here. We love the food here. And even with all this back noise, it becomes part of your daily life, and you truly learn to appreciate it all. So thank you for watching the video. Hopefully this has helped, and we'll see you in the next one. Peace.